Okay, hello again, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Junior Achievement Company Program Speaker Series. We will remind everyone that we are being recorded and that this will be posted to YouTube probably mid this week. And so any of our volunteer coordinators that are on with us today, please share this with the rest of your students. I will also remind everyone that is with our traditional format, we will take about 20 minutes to have a conversation with our guests this evening. And then for the last 10 minutes, we will open it up for questions and we will ask that you raise your hand. And then when I call on you, please go ahead and unmute your microphone and video. But during the initial portion, please keep phones on mute. So with that, I would like to introduce, and sometimes when you're doing these introductions and you talk about your good friend, this is a good friend of mine, Ed Grocholski, who is the Senior Vice President of Brand for Junior Achievement. I have known Ed for at least 15 years in two different Junior Achievement locations, both in Ed's role working for JA and actually, as I'm sure he'll share this evening, when he actually didn't work for Junior Achievement. So Ed, welcome to our program this evening.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. And so Ed, we always start off with a very easy question that I know you can get right, and that's just tell us a little bit about yourself and your current role with Junior Achievement.
Well, thanks, Paul. As Paul mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President of Brand for Junior Achievement USA, and brand is another way of saying marketing. I do a lot of marketing and communications, and in this role, I oversee the national awareness of the organization and also provide support to JA offices across the country, including Paul's. And everything we do runs the gamut. We do web development, social media content, we do press releases, we develop advertising. We do brand messaging, and we do a lot of market research, which I know is an area that we want to talk a bit about today. So really fortunate to be in an area that I enjoy working in, and also with an organization whose mission I fully support. So glad to be here today to talk about these things.
Thanks, Ed. And so even though I know the answer to this, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you kind of got into this field and, what you did before you landed with Junior Achievement.
All right. Well, what's really funny, so when I was in high school, I was actually really into comic books. And so I did a lot of writing and a lot of drawing, a lot of art, and actually got into painting. And, at the time, I didn't really know much about marketing or creative services or anything, any of the things that really go into marketing and PR. And so, at the time, my dad was kind of like, well, what are you going to do? So I went to college. And I actually went to college on a fine arts scholarship. And after a couple of years at the University of Oklahoma, ended up switching into broadcast journalism because I liked the art part and I liked the writing part. And I thought there was more opportunity from an occupation standpoint with broadcast journalism. So I did that, ended up majoring in communications at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and started off in radio. I did that for 3 or 4 years. I was again, broadcast journalist, wrote news stories. I did a little bit of on-air work. It was not, as my boss said, I didn't really have the pipes, but in terms of my voice, but did a lot of the writing and coordination and planning. And then it was interesting because I dealt with a lot of public relations people. They would come to me and try to place stories on the radio station I was working at. And a lot of them, I'll be honest, weren't that good at what they did. And I said, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And so that's really how I kind of got into public relations, which was really my entree into marketing. And what was interesting at the time, I was working for a company called Business Radio Network, and Gary Hickman, who at the time was the vice president of Junior Achievement USA's communications team, would come in occasionally to do interviews. We were both in Colorado Springs, where I am now. And they had a job opening, and he knew me from that, and ended up getting a job working for Junior Achievement USA in the communications department. So that's really how I started. Now there's a lot more that I can get into as we go through the conversation, but that was really sort of how I ended up landing in that whole marketing space. And it wasn't really something I ever really planned on or intended. I kind of found it, and it kind of found me.
It's kind of interesting there, Ed, because you've hit on 2 points that have become, I think, themes as we've had these conversations. the first being pivoting in your career. I think you are now our third speaker who ended up very passionate about what they do, but very clearly was not necessarily what they went to school for, what they dreamed about when they were a kid, and the ability to pivot in terms of opportunities that are presented before you. I think the second thing I heard mentioned is the importance of network, right? You came across this job because a person in your network, Gary Hickman at the time, recognized qualities in you that he thought were a good fit for a position that he knew was available. And so, that idea of always maintaining your network and always building on your skill set to pivot when those opportunities are presented, I think are some themes that we've seen. And as you know, Ed, are really common themes in terms of how we build or how our students build their endeavors in the company program. So, with that in mind, can you tell me what would be the one thing? What's that one skill that you think has been most important as you've made those decisions in your career?
Well, I mean, I look at skills in two different ways, and you hear a lot about this: the hard skills and then the soft skills. And the hard skills, I always worked on writing. I kind of had an artistic background, so those were good hard skills to have. But the soft skills really were about the willingness to learn, constantly trying to improve myself. And one thing that I also, I'll, especially if you end up in marketing or sales or anything, is that ability to present yourself. And that takes a bit of work. I mean, it's funny because they have these personality indexes, and a lot of folks, and I don't know what yours is, Paul, but a lot of folks land there's actually a characteristic for a salesperson. I'm like the complete opposite. I'm an analytic person. I shouldn't be able to sell anything. And yet, working on it, I found ways that I was comfortable talking about things, that we're able to communicate things effectively to people. So certainly, especially in this space with the marketing communications, communicate what you're trying to get across, being able to present. These are all important skills to have as you go down the road.
Okay. Thanks, Ed. So let's pivot into where our students are in their company program journey. Ed, you know the program, and a lot of times, and we spent last week talking about as you're starting to make your product selection. What are some of the steps in trying to decide how you make that decision? Kind of the art of making a decision. But what we really wanted to talk about tonight is understanding your audience, right? And how make those decisions so that as an entrepreneur, you're best meeting the needs of your your customer. So tell us a little bit about how that plays into your role with Junior Achievement in terms of some of the work that you've done in understanding our customers as an organization and how that informs the decisions that you make.
Well, a lot of it has to do with what problem are you trying to solve for the customer. I think sometimes people take the perspective, especially when it comes to marketing or even sales. There is a connection between marketing and sales, but ultimately what you're trying to do is figure out what it is that you can do for your customer that maybe nobody else can do, or do it in a way that's effective or faster or better quality. And so it's really getting into the mind of the customer and how you're able to do that. From a standpoint of Junior Achievement, one of the things that we do is we work with the business community, and the business community has what they call corporate social responsibility, where they need to engage within the community. And one of the great strengths of Junior Achievement is we're able to help these companies do that in terms of how we approach things. So a lot of it is really getting into the mindset of how the customer thinks. And what's interesting, and I know you've got, the folks here are young entrepreneurs. One of the top reasons why a business fails isn't lack of money or isn't bad management. It's there is no market for the product or service. And so it's incredibly important to really identify who your customer is, what the issue is that you're trying to solve. Because really, entrepreneurs are about solutions. You're about solving problems for people. It's not about just selling something to someone. It's really about getting to know them, getting to understand what their challenges are, and finding a way to make their life better. And so the market research component is incredibly important when it comes to running a business and accomplishing that.
So Ed, when we think of customers from a junior achievement perspective, maybe just give us a brief bit of insight as to what that means to you, because oftentimes I think there's a sense of, well, nonprofits really don't have customers, but
Right.
as I know, and a little bit of inside baseball, we do a lot of actually market research to make sure that the JA brand is positioned correctly. So talk to us a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah. So we have three overarching customers as an organization. Obviously, we work with students, but really what we're trying to do is the students are really the beneficiaries of what we're doing. And so our primary customers are the teachers or educators, the volunteers, and the businesses or organizations that support us. And so we've done a great deal of research in terms of identifying really how we can work with those folks. For instance, the research we've done with educators, we found that they're always looking for an enriched learning experience for young people, for the folks in their classes, to keep them engaged and help them make the connection between what they're learning in the classroom and how it applies, to life outside of the classroom, to their future. For volunteers, a lot of it is, there's a lot of intimidation from a volunteer standpoint. We're a little unusual for most nonprofit organizations. In the nonprofit space, typically a volunteer is someone who might, work at a food kitchen or something or picking up trash or painting playgrounds or whatever like this. With junior achievement, it's a little bit more involved because you're asking people to come into the classroom or engage in the JA company program, share some of their time, and kind of be vulnerable. I mean, they're having to share their experience, and the stakes are pretty high for them because they're looking at the students and they want to make sure you're getting something valuable out of it. And so how do we lower that anxiety about that and really help them understand what's involved in it? Because a lot of people really want to help in their community. They want to be able to share their story. So how do we communicate that more effectively? And then again, the businesses and the employers and the community that want to be able to provide something that really helps benefit the community, promotes economic opportunity for everyone. How do we do that in a way that makes a lot of sense within the context of these companies? Because they want to get their employees engaged and they want to be able to say they've had an impact in the community. So we really do a lot of research around that to make sure that we are communicating those things effectively and that we are providing them the pathway to be able to do that successfully.
Okay. So a lot of what you're doing is you're providing a way to share the value proposition of the organization. So the audience that you're trying to reach will make a decision to, in a sense, put their dollars or their resource, probably a better word, either dollars or time, towards junior achievement. So let's take that same equation now and put that in the context of the company program. So we have students that will now, as they decide what their products or services will be, will need to start to take that into their community and make some decisions about cost, make some decisions about distribution. In some cases, you still need to make decisions about their products. So tell us a little bit from your experience on how you take that same you just shared, and what are the things you think our students would need to know as they're making decisions or putting together their plans to sell their products within the community?
Well, again, a lot of it is first getting an idea of what the need might be. If there's not a need, you're going to have a hard time selling a product or service. And then once you've kind of figured out what the need is, you really need to, any way you can do research to gain a little bit better understanding of what people are looking for. Now, when you hear about things with marketing, you talk about price, placement, product, those kinds of things. And people tend to lean toward, well, how do we make this the least expensive? But as Paul was mentioning, value proposition is a really big deal. It's the implied value of what you're offering as it's compared to anything else. And for example, Apple is a great company when it comes to that. I mean, their computers are about twice the expensive of a typical PC, but they bring value to it. And so it's how do you define what that value is with the mindset of your customer. But one of the things that we do a lot of work with, and there's a lot of cost-effective ways of doing this, is doing research, and you can use it through systems like SurveyMonkey, and you don't even have to pay. You just get a list of folks and share with people that you know to really kind of test some of your ideas. I will say this, and what's really interesting about product development, and there's been a lot of thought around this, and if you ever do research on Edward Demings. Edward Demings was actually the father of total quality management, and you'll hear terms like continuous improvement. He said innovation comes from the producer, not the customer. So the producer has to step forward with an idea, and then you test it in the research. You don't start with the research to try to figure out what it is you want to do. So as your teams get together, think through some different ideas, and a great thing, and I'm sure Paul and his team are probably sharing these ideas with you, is a minimum viable product. Basically a concept of what it is you want to do, where you don't invest a lot of time or energy or resource into it, but something that you can test with an audience, with a potential customer, to see if it has merit and has the value to be able to be produced into something else. Again, I mean, this is difficult. Most small businesses, as I mentioned, failed because they don't get this part right. And what's really funny is a lot of major companies have products that fail because they don't get this right. So there is a little bit of trial and error, but the idea is that as much as you can invest in that initial minimum viable product stage and then do the testing, that's going to go a long way to help you in terms of identifying what it is you can offer to a customer and how you can be successful.
And Ed, do you have any advice? You talked about, SurveyMonkey, for example, and again, I think that's a good one because there are some things you can do with that for free without any investment. I think often when I see where some of our student teams struggle is, we all kind of have our own bubbles, right? And the people that we tend to reach out to tend to be like us. So if we think it's a good idea, they're going to think it's a good idea. But do you have any insight as to how maybe you expand your audience a little bit and get feedback on your service or your product that maybe might not be your normal audience, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely some more cost-effective ways, and you might have to invest a little bit. I'm not talking about a ton of money, but like $10, $20 to do some boosted promotion. I mean, you've got surveys through Facebook, Twitter. There are some other applications I'm sure that you can take a look at to get that out there. Social media is a good way to do it because what you do is you identify maybe not your friends, but people who are close to your friends, so whoever your potential audience is. The great thing about research, or the most important thing about research, is anonymity. And even when you do, focus groups, I've done a lot of focus groups. You can have anywhere from 5 to 10 people in a focus group. Even that gets biased. But if you have a survey of 50 people or 100 people, and they don't know you and you don't know them, that's where you really get the great insight in terms of whether you're on the right track or not. And again, even with SurveyMonkey, you can pay for those things. I know that can get expensive, but if you can find a way to distribute and the other thing too is there are resources out there in the community if you want to try to engage your local chamber or other groups like that may have connections that they're willing to support you and try some things out. So it doesn't hurt to talk to some people and say, hey, by the way, I noticed you've got a lot of members with your organization. Would you mind, just shooting this out to a few of them just to get their perspective? Because I think they might potentially be a good customer. There are ways to do that without investing a ton of money. So that's another thing to take a look at.
And then sometimes when you do that research, information may come back that is conflicting, right? There's not a clear path for your decision. There's not a clear sign from your audience. Do you have any insight as to, again, through the lens of our students, on at the end of the day, what's the one thing they need to think about, about sharing that value proposition with their potential customers?
So I will tell you this. So if you're getting a totally mixed result on something, I mean, it's actually better to either be told it's great or it's terrible. What you don't want is the mixed result because it's very hard to figure out what's going on. Typically what I do, and I do a lot of this, I look at how do I gather information. And one of the things that I love doing is open comments when I do research. Open comments where what do you like and what do you don't like? Because at that point, you start picking out little trends. You may not always see that in a survey or some quantitative study. But if you say what's working, what isn't, what do you like, what do you don't like, that's where you start to learn, okay, this is why I'm getting this response from people. So be open to that. And that's the other thing, you have to be open to it. You're probably going to hear things you don't want to hear. And as an entrepreneur, as someone who wants to be a successful business person, you're going to have to possibly make changes to get your product or service to where it needs to be.
Okay. So I'm going to give the reminder. If you have questions, please go ahead and raise your hand. So Ed, one last question before we open it up to the group. What is the one thing, so you were in high school, you were that aspiring comic book artist. What's the one thing that you wish someone had told you then that would have been the most beneficial now, in your role with Junior Achievement?
Well, from my personal experience, again, I loved art. One thing I didn't understand was that there was this whole industry called graphic design, and that was something that I did not know about. But that's a particular thing. But I think more in general, you don't have to have it all figured out right now. And that's more of a career thing than an entrepreneurship thing. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. What you do need is the momentum. You need to move forward because, again, as my experience, and I think, Paul and others can talk about, in a lot of ways, people don't end up ultimately working with what they focused on when they were leaving high school and going into college, for example, or getting out of it. So you don't, the momentum is what's important. You will find success. And what's funny is you have to be open to new ideas, because my feeling is, don't think about the money, don't think about the title, don't think about the prestige, don't think about any of that. Think about what makes you happy. I mean, to me, I'm fortunate. I think, and I don't want to necessarily speak for Paul, but there are folks out there who have jobs, there are folks out there who have careers, and then there are folks who have callings. I feel like I have a calling. I feel like I'm in an area that I really love in terms of marketing, and I'm working for an organization I really believe in, and I think it's incredibly important. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I've been open. I've been open to trying new things, to failing, to succeeding, and not to really set myself in any one course, but really to explore what's out there and try to figure out really what was the best for me. And so, again, if I were to have some advice to somebody who's starting out, and by the way, and I didn't really share this, I was an entrepreneur for 10 years. I actually started my own marketing firm in DC and did that for 10 years. And that was fantastic. I loved it. But I also love what I'm doing now. So, and again, it's all because I've been willing to be open and explore new and different things, and not just be laser focused on one or two things.
Okay. And Ed, before we open it up for questions, now I really feel like a talk show host with this, but I think you have an upcoming online event that you might want to plug for us.
Sure. So tomorrow on CNBC, we're going to have a virtual summit for more equitable and just tomorrow. And a lot of it has to do with, everything that's been going on around economic disparity and promoting a more diverse and equitable society. And so it's on CNBC.com, on their website tomorrow at CNBC.com/JA Summit. Or you can also register on ja.org/summit as well. But it's something we'll be sharing on all our social media channels. It's actually going to feature 13 JA students from across the country talking to a panelist of really well-respected professionals and leaders in business about the topic of how to create a more equitable society. And so I'm really excited to see that.
Thank you, Ed. And we'll send out the information for that program to all of our company program students as well. So with that, do we have any questions from anyone in our audience tonight? Okay, so I'm gonna, let's see. Okay, so we got our first one, and help me with, as we know, always get the names wrong. At least this time I have my glasses on, which was my trouble last time. Iod? Oh, there you go.
It's Iode.
Iode. Okay, so
Yeah.
I got maybe a 3 out of 5 there. So
It's
go
better than
ahead
most people.
and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for speaking for us. I learned more about marketing than I have in like most of my research with you. So you talked about before, like selling yourself is probably really selling yourself or selling a product, like the ability to sell it, I should say, is really important. I just wanted to like ask like what can you focus on to make sure that you're doing that correctly?
Okay. So first of all, I like to say this, that if people buy you, they'll buy anything you have to sell. I mean, that's really, it's not the product, it's you. And that's incredibly important. The other thing with marketing, sales is actually a big part of marketing. I think a majority of the people who have marketing degrees actually work in sales. So to me, it's really, and as I was sharing with my experience, it was really getting to the point where I understood my personality and how best to sell. What I found is when I'm speaking about something I know well, I'm more comfortable. And when you're more comfortable, you're able to sell yourself better. That's a huge thing. So if you're into technology, if you're into these things, if you really know it and can talk about it, now you don't want to, again, I could go on and on and on about data analytics and things like that, or art or whatever I'm interested in, but you really want to build it down to where it's a very concise presentation. But when you're talking from a point of comfort and confidence, that comes through. You don't have to be a jokester. You don't have to be the slap on the back, car salesman type personality. I think that's how people perceive sales. And you don't have to be the guy who just drives. What you do need to do is connect with people on a personal level by being authentic. And by being authentic, it's really understanding what it is you're talking about. And the other thing, and I've done sales because of business development, selling my company and selling products. Ask questions. People, you're not going to go wrong by asking a question and try to figure out, what do you need? What are some of the challenges that are out there? And Paul can attest. I mean, I don't know how many times you and I had lunch, over the years. And it was just a lunch. It wasn't like, I'm going to sell you something today, because he used to be a client of mine. It was, let's have lunch. Oh, okay. Well, what are you dealing with? This is and then like maybe a few weeks later, I come back. By the way, I remember you talked to me about this. Have you thought about this? And if you did, this is maybe a way we can help you with it. So that's really how you connect with people. It's got to be authentic and personal.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So next we have Luke.
Hello.
Hello, Luke.
I would like to thank you guys for putting on this presentation for us. It was really, I thought some of the things you had to say were very interesting. I was just wondering, could you touch a little bit more on being authentic? And in a way, as I'm growing up and becoming an adult, I'm finding it a little bit more difficult to be authentic sometimes. So
Yes.
if you could give any advice on that in general, that would be great.
Yeah, so there's varying degrees of authenticity. I think it's you can be authentic without oversharing, and I went through that same process you did. Sometimes it was like I had a really good joke, but didn't quite understand the group I was with or the audience I was with, or sometimes you might be a little sharp in a remark or criticism or something like that. It's something you kind of build over time, where you can be your true self, but there's just certain things you just bite your tongue. There's certain things you just don't say or share, and you start to read what they call read the room. You start to understand the audience that you're working with, and again, that takes a little bit of experience and time. But the other thing that I've learned too is, and Paul might be able to share on this too, because sometimes I'm seen as kind of a quiet person. You don't always have to say something. Sometimes when you just get the person to start talking and get the information, you wait for the opportunity to share something very relevant to what they're saying. And so again, from an authenticity standpoint, what I found is, speak when you feel like you have something true to say, and something that's of value to share with folks. You don't have to feel compelled that I have to drive a conversation, especially when you're talking to a potential client or customer. Again, that's where the asking of the questions comes in great, because if you ask people questions, they'll start talking, and then you find your opportunity to jump in with something. So I found that very valuable.
And I'd just add to that, and Ed, you hinted at this, and you said it before. It's ask questions and listen. People will, we want to talk to people who have an interest in what we have to say. I mean, that's just human nature. And, it's as Ed knows, he brought it up, so I'll say it. When you see people who will be with Ed in a meeting, and then people who will see Ed in a presentation, think it's two different people. Because he is able to build what he is trying to share based on his audience. He understands that room he is working with. So the conversation he will have with me is very different than if he's standing up and talking about brand to a room full of 200J associates. So it does all come back to, Luke, is you want to be authentic, but the way to first do that is understand who you're trying to be authentic with.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Luke. Gabe, I see you have a question.
Hi, it's Max actually.
Oh, Matt.
Hey, Max.
Hi. So I just had a question about something that stood out to me that you said earlier. You were talking about like with surveys and kind of getting customer feedback and things like that. You're kind of talking about how you need to be able to take like criticism,
Yeah.
and kind of use it. So I just wanted to ask, like, I guess, how would you best take criticism? Like if you put out a survey and got like a lot of like negative feedback, I guess, like, do you think it'd be better to kind of like scrap that idea or maybe pivot and change it? Like, what do you think?
So typically what I would look at is, and again, that's why I like always having some sort of open-ended question. So it'd be like, did you like this? Did you not like it? And then why? And when you get that open-ended question, then you start to better understand what the situation is. And for example, sometimes, I mean, we've done testing on things and it's like, oh, I hate it. And you're like, oh, this is a terrible idea. We have to throw it out the door. And it's like, when you look at it, they didn't like the font. I mean, it's like, it's not the idea. It's just like fixated on one thing on it. So again, the open-ended question, sometimes you have to throw things out. I mean, I've done so many campaigns and creative over the years where I thought it was just fantastic. And I shared it with a customer and they were like, this doesn't work for me. And it's like, okay, well, let's just start over again. You have to develop a tough skin over time. And I know it's not easy and it does take time. But it's not necessarily a commentary on your talent or your approach. Sometimes it's just where that person is when they see what you present to them or the product or the service. So you can't take it personally. What you can do is figure out, is there something I can learn from this and apply this to something I'm doing in the future? Because that's really where it ends up in the end. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest mistakes in marketing, and I've seen this. I worked for Ogilvy Public Relations for a few years. I had my own agency. We worked with customers. The biggest mistake you can make in marketing is this idea that this ownership of your idea, and you get the market research in, and the first response is, let's change the question so it reinforces what we want to do. That's where companies get into trouble. That's where businesses fail. And it happens a lot. What you want to do is use research to say, tell me something I don't know, and I may not like it, but it may help me take what I'm doing and make it better. And that's really when you do market research, that's how you should look at it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Max. Well, with that, we have reached the end of our time, and I want to thank all of our students and volunteers who participated tonight. Ed, when we started this, one of the things that we wanted to make sure as students had an opportunity to build their network, we invite our guests that LinkedIn is a great way to do that. And if any of our students reach out to you, we hope you will, add them to your network. And Ed, I mean, there are probably very few people I know within my 20 plus years at Junior Achievement that are authentic and as passionate about this mission as Ed is. So particularly if this is a field that you're interested in, I encourage you to connect with him and use him as a potential mentor as you move forward. So Ed, thank you so much for your time tonight. And everyone else, I look forward to seeing you for our last company program speaker series event of 2020 next week. So everybody have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Have a great night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.